So I've actually had, in that sense, rather interesting career. I worked for a government, my own government, rather briefly. I worked for World Bank. I worked for two international organizations, World Bank and UNESCO, and then I worked for a startup, essentially. I mean, a non-profit, but still a non-profit startup, which was successful. So it's been a very interesting and quite satisfying career. Immediately after graduating, I went back to Britain for 2 years, where I worked in the British government, actually in the Foreign Office. So it was quite related to having been at SAIS in that sense. Mm-hmm. And I ended up working on something very, very unusual for a young person, because I was only, I don't know, 26 or something. I ended up working on the Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe, independence negotiations.
Wow.
Where, so it was kind of interesting being on the side of the former colonial power, not myself being an anti-colonizer anyway, and trying to work out, you know, and I was charged, believe it or not, at my young age, with trying to work out at least a lot of the detail of the economic package that was to go into place. It wasn't completely successful, that first round of talks, the ones I was involved in, but it was actually very kind of exciting. I was sort of doing things like flying into Harare, what then called Salisbury. It's amazing how things have changed. You know, in the middle of the night on military planes and things, and having secret discussions. So it was kind of a very exciting thing, a very exciting start to a career. Two reasons. One was frankly practical. I had been immediately after my undergraduate degree, I'd actually worked at the World Bank for in Washington, a couple of years as a very low level, as research assistant. And I kind of come to like living in Washington and so on. So I thought about going to a university in Washington, and that would have. And SAIS seemed to be the right one from that point of view. That wasn't actually the main reason. The main reason was as an undergraduate, where I was at Oxford, I had studied economics and politics, you know, quite in some depth. But I realized I hadn't studied things like international relations, international organizations, all that sort of thing. So that's I was looking for a university where I could do that, mm-hmm. And I was also looking for a U.S. university. I hadn't made any at that point. I had made no decision to move to the U.S. or anything, but it was just having been an undergraduate in Britain, it seemed it would be okay, sensible to try and be a graduate, you know, somewhere else. And so that's what happened. And then I was fortunate enough to be, in those days, there was money available for, which isn't these days. Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to be offered a essentially free ride at SAIS. First of all, just a general principle, not just SAIS, but I mean, I think of people who've been, you know, moderately successful like me, we should try to always give back. In a certain sense, I've tried to spend my whole life giving back by working on developing countries and so on. But I mean also in a practical, you know, financial sense. I mean, one should try to support. I mean, I'm not, you know, having been basically a bureaucrat, I'm not a rich person, but I mean, I have reasonable resources, and I should, you know, do my bit. I think that's important. And so I support the educational institutions which I myself have attended. Mm-hmm. I also support, by the way, other educational institutions, you know, for people in poor countries and so on. So, but anyway, it's partly just a general principle of giving back, and then the specific. Well, I felt a gratitude to SAIS. I was able to go there for free. That's very, very difficult nowadays, I think. And so, if I can help somebody, not specific individual, I don't want to do that, but in a general way, if I can help somebody get there or stay there who wouldn't have otherwise managed it, well, I think that's a good thing. Frankly, a good thing to try to do. Two things really. One, exposed me to a whole lot of people that I wouldn't have otherwise met, because although I was already in Washington, as I explained at the World Bank, that meant that actually it wasn't, of course, World Bank is somewhat US dominated, but nonetheless, I wasn't that exposed to American policymakers in an international field and that sort of thing. And this was an interesting time in the world, by the way. Well, today is an even more interesting time, but this was a time of the Vietnam War, difficult time in the US when emotions were running high, especially among young people such as students. And we had this very interesting mix of American students there, men students, because of women, there wasn't a draft for women, some of whom had been, in the US military, and some of whom, of course, had done everything they could not to be, because they opposed things so much. And so it was really a very interesting time to be there. The fact that these people of with very different views were there, but they were actually able to communicate with each other, and did. And this may seem strange these days when things are so polarized, but yeah, but in those, so it was a polarizing issue in a certain sense. But on the other hand, the lines of communication always seemed to be open. A second thing was they had a lot of visiting lecturers and professors and people, and one-off visitors. And I'm sure you still have all of that. A lot of those people were really interesting, and gave me a whole lot of ideas about things I could do that I hadn't thought about. So and more so, frankly, than the regular professors who typically their own career had been, go do a PhD, become a professor, right? I mean, not completely, but somewhat. And so it was actually quite inspiring to me to be exposed to all these, what should I call them, irregular professors or special professors or whatever you want to call them. But when I was doing a PhD, I had there's a certain stage when you're not doing anything except writing your dissertation. You finished with, and you're actually quite isolated in a certain sense. Yeah. So my fondest memory was, in fact, just being able to. We had a cafeteria then, so it was a place you could just go and you could quite literally just sit down and talk to somebody. You didn't have to know them. And I found that was a great, so I feel very fondly about that. That's another way I learned things, not just when I was doing my PhD, but my dissertation, but especially then, because I was otherwise, sitting at home working on it, or sitting in the library working on it, and it was kind of slightly isolated. So I kind of liked that companionship and intellectual stimulation that came from just the ability to talk to somebody you didn't even know necessarily. The policy implication of something is more important than the thing itself. And so for me, that was something I got from sometimes positively from courses and sometimes negatively because it didn't exist in the course, but in both ways. It was that kind of realization. I always use that now as one of my guiding principles when I'm trying to decide whether to do something or not is, well, does this have any sort of policy implication? Not just is it interesting or is it even important, but has it got some sort of implication? Just acquiring knowledge wasn't important. Just even creating knowledge is not sufficient. One has to do something with it. As Karl Marx famously said, the point is not to interpret the world, the point is to change it, right? This was a time of the Vietnam War that was dominant in US society at that time, and especially among not only Americans, who then were a clear majority, but even I think we were about one quarter who were not Americans, but among those of us who were not American also, it was the dominant topic. So it's very hard to frankly remember anything else politically. It was a socially friendly place among students. There was actually some not as much interaction with professors, I mean outside class, as I had experienced when I was at Oxford. So that was interesting to me. I don't know if that's I don't know what that's like these days, but it's also when people were of quite a wide, partly because of that Vietnam War and some people having had to serve in the military and so on, but also for other reasons. People were quite a wide age range. I would, from early 20s to mid 30s, let's say. Make sure that you learn as much as you can from everybody around you, not just from your formal classes. I mean, do not ignore your formal classes. You must get your degree, of course, but you have a lot of opportunities for learning there in an intense and concentrated way that you won't have when you're in a job, and in a sort of diverse way. I mean, learning about things that maybe are not your immediate interest, but that you never know what's going to be interesting or useful to you later on. So I think that would be my main advice. Try and lap up as much as you can in terms of the exposure to ideas and things to which you haven't been exposed before.